this is an image similar to the one that's in the room there, and it's kind of how I got connected to this group. How I got here was that this piece was submitted to one of the sort of calls for the Places and Spaces Science Maps thing, and I got in, so I got to meet Kati and got to have a lot more to do with science mapping than I used to do. I think of myself as generally mapping things that are of a historical nature, or that time is nearly always part of what I do, but not all the time anymore. And we use the buzzword here as the sort of organizing principle of this evening, a data visualization. And I actually don't use that too much myself. I think of my work as being informational graphics, and I would think it's a kind of a larger term that encompasses data visualization, but it has an older history, and in some ways it's a little different. I would call all of these things right here informational graphics, and there, you see that there, most of them are recognizable to you, and as to what they sort of are. You've been exposed to them your whole life long. We've got like a geographical map. It's an informational graphic in a way. Got the sort of science graph there. That's a scatter plot, right? The flow chart, probably a corporate organizational flow chart, and just a plain old instructional diagram. So I sort of want to talk about some basic ideas, just a couple of basic ideas quickly, that I think are important to understand when you're talking about informational graphics, and important to remember when you start getting into data visualization, because data visualization kind of has its own little motor. It just takes off and goes off in places, and sometimes I like to reconnect it to some of the things I think are important to recognize about informational graphics. And I'm definitely digressing here, so I should probably show the next slide. Okay, so this is an image, but it's not an informational graphic, right? And that's because it's got this kind of mechanical relationship to what it's actually showing. And then when you do informational graphics, you generally are working with signs and symbols and not that same kind of image. And these signs and symbols can be entirely abstract, which is like an alphabet, where there's no direct relationship between what's being represented and the symbol itself, except for sort of a body of information that we share. Or somewhat abstract, where the thing represented looks a lot like the symbol. And you can get these understandings so these symbols make sense, either from kind of cultural, shared culture, like there's probably no innate reason why a red octagon has to mean stop, but we all kind of understand it. And others probably have a more innate or intuitive sense. They sort of attach themselves to some kind of commonly experienced metaphor, and so they don't have to actually be explained always, that they'll kind of explain themselves a little bit. But anyway, so the thing about informational graphics is that it can, accompany, it doesn't really replace language, but it becomes this way of using larger parts of our brain than sometimes we are using just with math and written words. And then you get to actually use more senses and more parts of your brain, let's just say, to understand, get a kind of a bigger understanding. But the main thing is that informational graphics has to be a meaningful language of signs. There has to be some kind of shared readability that people kind of agree about, and therefore it has to have a certain amount of consistency. Otherwise, it's not going to work, right? That was idea one. And idea two is that I think that you can take informational graphics and break them down into three general strategies. jumping ahead to the sort of manifesting, that's one I invented a couple of days ago. But it's just a way to describe what I think a lot of data visualization does as a kind of a tool, not necessarily as a kind of rhetorical device, but as a tool. It's actually used to experiment and come up with things. Artists and scientists often just have a lot of stuff that they don't really know what to do with it. And they just play with it. And what pops up is sometimes it's just a way to do that. And so, but I'm not really going to talk about that now. But I figured when we got into the discussion in the panel that this was going to come up a lot. So I'm going to talk about the other two. The index. Okay. A lot of tables, geomaps, scientific data are really just ways to organize a lot of relevant information or a lot of related information. The map just has all that stuff. It's organized so you know where it is. It's got a direct relationship to how you can find things. It's just there, right? So I think of it as an index, just like a big table, just like a big library. And it has its own system of how it's organized. And then this scatter plot, it's information. And there's basically have some kind of factual basis. And they're put where they belong and organized in that kind of way, right? Now, if you take an index and you, in this case, this map, and you draw a line between two places, it's no longer just an index. Now it's a narrative. It's actually telling a story. It's telling how to get from A to B, from Los Angeles to New York. So it's in a different category from being an index. It's a narrative. And the same with the scatter plot. If you draw a median curve through all that, you're basically editorializing, you're making a point, and it becomes kind of a narrative. So my idea with the narratives is that basically people learn through stories. It's how we understand almost everything that we know, one way or another. And actually, when Gary gets up here, he's going to be talking probably about a lot of this kind of stuff. He's going to cover it in probably in greater detail. But my basic crib sheet of a narrative is that you have to have an action or a change. That's kind of like a plot. And then you have to have a lot of background information that basically gives the context and provides all the understandings that are necessary to make any sense out of the change. Okay. Now, that's actually not a way normally a scientist will work. They're trying to present a kind of objective, and narratives tend not to be objective. They tend to present a particular point of view and a kind of editorial. And science basically has to go back and forth between these two things because part of it, that's just not the model of objectivity that science is straining to achieve, but it's the only way to explain things. It's the way to explain things. And in doing that, and this is the last text slide I have, okay, then it's pictures. You kind of have to decide what your task is as to what you're going to be doing in it with any particular informational graphic or data visualization. And that's that if you're trying to organize your information, it may be an index. The Discover one, you know, it's a kind of experimental thing. Then you might just need to push stuff up, and it's a lot more like an index than a narrative. But when you actually learn something and you want to convey it, then you can kind of rely on a narrative. And narratives are really where I work. It's the way that I do stuff. And a lot of this has to do with the audience that you're going to be talking to. And I work nearly always with a general audience. And very often data visualization is for an expert audience, and they can read things in different ways, and they're looking for things, and it's a whole different thing. Now, has anybody ever seen this before? Yeah. It's really famous. If you do graphics, it's really famous. We have a superhero. This is a superhero, but there is a sort of a contemporary hero named Tufte from Yale who practically wrote a book about this diagram. And the reason that it deserves a little bit of attention is because this is like the gold standard for a graphic narrative. Okay, and this is the story of Napoleon's march from Western Europe to Moscow and back. And what it shows, it's an amazing amount of stuff it shows, and it's an amazingly compelling story. this guy, Menard, he was really lucky that Western Europe and Moscow were situationally related from left to right because they made it read really well. That's just lucky. Anyway, he starts off with the whole army, and it's that beige line, and it's a big army, and they're marching, and they go east. They break off into a little area, and people are dying along the way. And what that line shows, as it dwindles, is the kind of what was the word they used to use? The attrition of the troops. They get to Moscow. They have a pretty good time. They turns to winter. They realize they better go home fast, and it shows the dwindling, ever more dwindling. And then he also puts a temperature graph in here showing how cold it was getting. And of course, they were dying mostly from exposure and disease. But anyway, so it's a classic. I learned a lot from this one. I had this idea that I wanted to tell stories with work instead of just, I mean, generally visual artists in the fine arts aren't rhetoricians. They're kind of like expressors. But I did feel like there was a lot of ideas I had that I wanted just to do. And this was my first experiment. And I used some of Menard's ideas in this one. This actually happens to be my autobiography. And in this one, what I did was I divided my life into categories. It starts off with my escapism and entertainment. It has loves, interests, things I did to play, work, my particular philosophy, the kind of self-identifications I had in my friends. And it takes me through my conception and birth to when I turned professional as an artist, and it just shows a lot of stuff. But the relationship, the things that are important to notice is that it's not people. I can throw this out and people can get it pretty quickly, and it has to do with some conventions of left to right reading. An understanding of, I mean, that over and over and over that time is going to be probably read that way in our culture. And the thing that I got from Menard was the expanding and contracting lines that allowed me to make these. I found a way to actually make areas have meaning on a continuum, and also how important they were. They get fatter or skinnier. So this was the beginning of me learning kind of a language. But there was another piece that I'm going to rush through here right now. This was done in Victorian England. It was a copy of one that was done by America. And this is this is like a 30-foot long piece. Okay, so this is the left side, and this is moving to the right. Okay, so it's long, and it starts off as all things did in Victorian England with Adam and Eve. And what you see here, these kind of lines, these kind of wiggly lines, they're wiggly for a reason, are the lives of the earliest people in the books of the Bible. And they go along, this is the Tower of Babel, after which nations and languages emerge, right? And also those biblical guys are still alive. And they stop being that important. And we have the beginning of Egypt. And it goes through here. I think that we have, this is maybe Philip of Macedonia, and then we have Alexander and the founding of empire, and you've got the Roman Empire, and look, the Roman Empire covers the whole world practically because it was told through the viewpoint of Western European. So it's got all those kind of interesting myopias that we have banished now, or not. But anyway, so the metaphor that they're using here, the visual metaphor, is these streams. The reason those lines are wiggly is because they're rivers, okay? And every culture, I got to move faster? Okay. Every culture is a river. There's another one. There's mine. Okay. This is a map of an artist's career. Enough said. This one is bigger. And this is a kind of a world history of art, but it starts around the 1600s, and it does some branching, and it shows a lot of connections with economic things. And I got the idea from this very important map, which is by Alfred Barr, and it shows the development of the ideas of abstract art from top to bottom, okay, naming all the schools, and so it has this kind of connectivity, and this one is showing a kind of descendant connectivity of affinities and sharing of ideas. That's what it's doing. And this is that same piece, turn on its side, spin it backwards to the 1600s and down up to the present time. You can see all these online in detail pretty well for free. If you put my name in the website, 2 or 3 clicks, you can find most of all these if you wanted to read them. This is more or less the same one as that, except for instead of about modern art, it's about rock and roll. And they look like rocks, right? And it starts off with African American traditions, European American traditions, that it rolls through, and it names schools like you've never heard of before unless you're a lot younger than me. Grindcore, shoegaze, those are all valid. This is called Downtown Body, and I was kind of ripping off or riffing on Gray's Anatomy, and it's actually the cultural history of downtown New York. Each kind of tendril represents one of the artistic disciplines. This is visual arts, up there is dance and theater, music, and poetry magazines, and it shows how they, in the 60s, they started really crossing over and getting, and if you know anything about that, you recognize a lot of names. These are fun when you know a little bit about it. That's actually a key to everything, is that if you know a little bit, you can find your way in. It's like a handle, and then you really can roll into, and that's what every graphic like this, they all need something common, some way to identify. This is the other archetype I wanted to show you. You get it, right? That happens to be about art too, artists, and it grows up, and it's the branching. This is these kind of metaphors that you can use to explain things. I did my own about various media, like the books and movies I liked as a kid, all the way through till I was in my 50s. But you don't need to follow too many rules. You can break them up and it still kind of works as long as you are staying within a visual language that people understand. This is about Frank Zappa. I think you could probably find your way through it because it's going to start off at the top in that corner, and then you just follow the leads and it goes all the way through. And so it's the first 20 years of his career. This is a history of the Jewish people. It's my favorite right now. I spent a long time on it. It starts with Abraham and goes to Israel. It covers the diaspora from the major events. This is the Babylon period where they got taken to Babylon and come back and start again. This is an incursion of Rome. You can see Alexander's empire here, the Roman Empire. This is Islamic empire. Up there is Christianity. At this time, most Jews lived under Islam. Up here, most of the Jews lived under Christian dominance, and here they live on their own, sort of. They're trying. And anyway, so it's pretty panoramic. It covers about 3,000 years, and then this is the same one from the beginning, but it's in Chinese. But I didn't do that. I mean, they asked me if they could, so they wrote it all in Chinese. I just think it's cool. And I've run out of time.